and welcome to the second day of our conference. Today we'll be talking about the case of Pakistan, the case of Algeria, and after lunch, our third session will be on military politics and democratic transitions. For the first session, I would like to call up to the podium Dr. Aqil, Shah, Dr. Ejaz Hussain, Dr. Rasul. And for this first session, our chair will be Junaid Ahmad. I'll be introducing Junaid Ahmad, and then Junaid Ahmad will take the floor introducing our speakers here today, inshallah. Mr. Junaid Ahmad is a PhD candidate in Islam and decolonial thought at the University of Leeds. Currently serves as the Secretary General for the International Movement for a Just World in Malaysia. Junaid has taught law, religion, politics at Lahore University. He's founder of Al-Auda chapter in Virginia and the Palestine Solidarity Committee in Pakistan. Junaid, the floor is yours. You can introduce the speakers.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to the second day of this incredibly important conference. I'm sure people are learning a lot and people are still coming in, so I expect this particular session in which I have an interest, but all of the sessions today get into, following yesterday's panel on Egypt, getting into the nitty-gritty of things and solid analysis, rigorous, and one that is able to provide the Ummah with a way forward, actually. And I think that we can engage this much more deeply in these particular case studies. So it is my great privilege, as always, to come to these CIGA conferences, participate in them, and we often speak about building communities, how to build and strengthen communities. And it's very clear that with Dr. Sami Al-Aryan with the staff here at CIGA, with now Naila Auntie has come in as well, what they have achieved here over the past few years is actually bringing together a community of scholars, of people interested in participating in that debate and discourse of how to move things forward. We have the most influential, important, rigorous scholars that have come here, but one of the defining marks of them is that they are not just contained and constrained and restrained in the academia, but most are very dedicated public intellectuals, and they try to make a difference in the debate and discourse. So those of us that think that this is merely an intellectual exercise, they have it wrong, because this is also one that I think will continue to compel most of us to be involved and in changing the terms of the discourse and trying to develop one that will advance the goals of justice and peace within the Muslim Ummah and its relations with the rest of the world. So I think, may embarrass him a bit, but I think if we can have another round of applause, Dr. Sami Al-Aryan, Naila Auntie, all the CIGA staff here for what they've achieved. It is no small feat, I can tell you that. After organizing many such things in Pakistan, it is just wonderful. So it is a great honor to have these wonderful scholars that I've been speaking about, and for me to chair this panel. I will introduce them each individually before their talk. And a great honor to have Dr. Aqil Shah as our first panelist, one of the leading writers on this topic, specific topic, which is often difficult to find. People who nowadays are speaking about everything with very little knowledge of them. And looking at Dr. Aqil Shah's bio, it's incredibly impressive, and people can obviously find these specifics in the booklet, in the program. But very briefly, he's a Wick Carey Associate Professor of South Asian Politics in the College of International Studies at the University of Oklahoma. His research interests include democratization, military politics, and security issues in South Asia, with a focus on Pakistan. He's the author of The Army and Democracy, Military Politics in Pakistan, and the incredible achievements you can check in the bio. He's been a Rhodes Scholar, he's been associated with the Rule of Law Project, Stanford University, and has been a fellow of the Society of Fellows at Harvard University. And he's also been policy advisor of the Asia Pacific Governance Program. And very importantly, he's also written for a source that many of us, if not have closely followed, should now do so, and that's the International Crisis Group in ICG, which provides very good analysis of these critical issues in the Muslim world. So he will be speaking about Pakistan's persistent Praetorianism, and it gives me great honor to have Dr. Aqil Shah address the floor at this point. Thank you very much.
So let me first thank Professor Samuel Aryan and CIGA for giving me this opportunity to share my research. I have been severely jet lagged, so I apologize in advance for my incoherence, brain freezing, and possibly unparliamentary language. Okay, so okay, so this is a broad outline of the talk that I'm going to give today. I'll talk briefly about what the puzzle is, what its theoretical significance is, what the conventional wisdom is on the issue of Praetorianism in Pakistan, what my argument is, share some of my findings, and then look at the most recent democratic transition that occurred in 2008, and also examine some prospects for change. So, Pakistan's dilemma, kind of struggle with democratic institutions, can be summed up in this cartoon right here. It's a kind of a merry-go-round. The military comes in after civilian misrule, then there's military misrule, and it's basically almost a permanent equilibrium trap between a cycling of civil and military regimes. The conventional wisdom tells us, political science primarily, why is this significant? Pakistan is actually a theoretical oddball because in the literature of civil-military relations, it's almost a deeply embedded assumption that professional militaries are politically neutral, that they are willing to carry out the tasks ordered by a civilian government, and that external threats are actually, again, conducive to civilian control because a military that's engaged in war fighting doesn't have any time for kind of projecting its force inward on a country. Pakistan is puzzling because it has a professional army and it perceives an existential threat from neighboring India. Yet, both these factors have had the opposite effect. So Pakistan army is professional. It's unlike most of the armies that we have studied in Latin America, as recently cases like Thailand. It's a highly cohesive, disciplined, hierarchically organized professional force. And it has a war-fighting mission. So both of these features should ideally work as a bulwark against authoritarianism, but that hasn't been the case. Why is it? So the main explanation that you find in the literature in civil-military relations is that military interventions or military dominance over a polity is the result of weak civilian institutions. The sort of structural explanations, political parties are weak, and in Pakistan that has been the case, no doubt. Pakistan's current mainstream political parties look more like family fiefdoms than they look like organized political parties. The problem with this explanation is that structural factors can at best provide the opportunity or environment for a military to enter politics, to get involved with politics. And there's also what social scientists call the endogeneity problem, which is this: civilian weaknesses may actually be endogenous to or because of military dominance. So if you have a country in which the first election was held 24 years after independence in 1970, that's hardly an environment where civilian institutions can flourish. And the military has wreaked havoc on political parties, on constitutions, on democratic institutions. So it's unclear whether it's civilian weaknesses that cause military intervention, or is it the military's influence that weaken institutions. The other very common explanation is kind of an agency explanation, where the military is seen as this rational bureaucratic actor that pursues and advances its own interests, budgets, internal autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that Pakistan, the conventionally understood corporate interests of the military have rarely been threatened by civilian governments. And there have rarely been cuts in defense budgets that have brought on coups in contexts in Africa and Latin America. And what I want to kind of present here is the notion that what also matters is how social actors define their interest in a specific context. So actors are not simply driven by cost-benefit calculation, but also by what is appropriate, right? What is appropriate in terms of what role you're playing. So if you're a military officer, what is the most kind of rightful, appropriate and expected action that you're supposed to take in a context? And I think military involvement in politics is shaped by the extent to which officers actually believe in the norm of civilian supremacy. Whether the military considers civilian control as fundamentally appropriate or just a technical convenience is crucial for democracies. Militaries that absorb the norm of civilian supremacy, for instance, don't respond to political instability or faltering government performance or bad national security policies by threatening to or actually unshielding their souls. Think of the very different responses that the American and French militaries had. So in Vietnam, when the Americans basically lost or surrendered or left, the American military kind of went along with it. Compared that with the reaction of French officers in Algeria who revolted. And one of the differences was that the American military has absorbed this kind of norm of civilian supremacy. So what matters is not just the logic of consequences and benefits, but also the logic of what's appropriate. So that brings us to the question of what norms are. So norms are essentially shared expectations or templates for appropriate behavior that are common to a community of actors or a given group or an organization. They act as templates, especially under conditions of uncertainty that you often get in a situation like a coup. So they act what social scientists call a coordination device, where officers and their soldiers can coordinate their expectations and reduce that uncertainty. Norms have a tendency to be sticky, what social science call path dependence, or a variety of mechanisms, even when the conditions under which they're produced change. So that those mechanisms include processes of institutional socialization, right? And specifically in institutions like the military, which rewards obedience, conformity to the chain of command, right? And discipline, organizational norms become even more salient in shaping organizational behavior and choices. So my main argument is that the Pakistani military's Praetorian organizational norms have shaped its kind of capacity and willingness to intervene in politics. And this organizational kind of normative setup is a product of the formative experience that this organization had under very difficult conditions. One was obviously internal conflict and division in the early stages of statehood, especially between what was then East and West Pakistan. So the Bengalis, who were in East Pakistan, were the majority of the population, but they were very underrepresented in the military and the bureaucracy, for instance. East Pakistan is now Bangladesh. So there was a project of assimilation, forget about that word, kind of forced assimilation or exclusionary nationalism that divided the polity. Then you were facing or perceived an kind of mortal danger from the enemy next door, which was India. And then, in order to kind of overcome that military weakness, Pakistan forged an alliance with the United States during the Cold War. And all of these factors have kind of created this ossified organizational normative structure that, alongside other factors, shape the calculations that military officers make in as far as their involvement in politics is concerned. So I have conducted over 200 interviews over a 10-year period. And to sum it up, the kind of main lesson is that much like the military in Egypt and for some time in Turkey, in Brazil and Argentina, the Pakistan military has a kind of savior complex. This is a servant of the state that has a savior complex. And I'll just share with you the interview findings. So in this interview sample, I can discuss this further. I interviewed at least 2 former Army Chiefs of Staff, 4 Director Generals of the Inter-Services Intelligence, which is Pakistan's premier military intelligence service, over a dozen corps commanders, officers above the level of Major General, some junior officers, as well as active duty officers. So most of these officers are retired. I also cross-checked some of these findings with military professional journals. The NDU, for instance, the highest war college of Pakistan, produces a professional journal. I looked at those, the memoirs of military officers. I also actually was lucky enough to find documents on the early years of Pakistan in the Pakistani archives on events such as the First Kashmir War and how the kind of seeds of Praetorianism were laid down at that time. So I do add, or hope that I add, some empirical value. But let me just illustrate some of the beliefs that were common to these officers. One was, country comes first. This is a classic, military identification with the nation state before they identify with a temporary government or a constitution. Pakistan's former dictator is famously, Zia-ul Haq famously said, what is a constitution but a piece of paper that should be thrown in a dustbin? So, constitution is disposable. The other refrain is that Pakistanis are largely illiterate or uneducated, and they're not ready for democracy. And democracy itself is not such a great idea. You look at China and Singapore, they're authoritarian. They were able to achieve high levels of economic development. Under Ayub Khan in the 1960s, another Pakistani general who I'll get to later, Pakistan enjoyed high rates of economic growth. So democracy itself is not really a recipe for national development. Politicians are basically morons. They're uneducated, they're dirty, they're lazy, they're corrupt, and some of them, politicians are corrupt everywhere. I open the newspaper in the US every morning, some state senator or legislator is, in trouble for corruption. So corruption is a universal human failing, and Pakistani politicians have not covered themselves in glory. But this is a common refrain, that politicians are corrupt, uneducated, feudal, they're unfit to govern, they don't have the mental capacity to understand a complex subject like national security. And almost without exception, there is this belief that under certain conditions, when the security of the state is at risk, when there is a deep political crisis, a coup is actually an appropriate form of political action. And the army's kind of belief in that kind of notion of superiority, that their own norms of discipline, order, efficiency are superior. And they're the only force that can protect the state and hold it together in the face of a Hindu-dominated behemoth that is India. And some of it is true because Pakistan and India have gone to war several times, although a minor footnote to this history is that Pakistan has initiated most of those wars, so we'll not get into that at this moment. So these norms, in the literature and kind of the socialization and organizational psychology, emphasize the role of founding fathers, that these individuals who kind of create these institutions leave an imprint. And I think General Ayub Khan was Pakistan's first army chief, Pakistani army chief, because Pakistan's first 2 army chiefs were British, left over from colonial rule. And then he was president and field marshal for 11 years. And I think his ghost still haunts the corridors of the general headquarters of the army. And he says, we need a system of government that can provide a focal point of authority for national integration. The untrained and uneducated politicians cannot create a true nation. The army alone has the sense of duty, discipline, and patriotism to put our house in order. So this is very early on, a few years after Pakistan's independence, that the military begins to realize there's an external threat, the politicians are divided, they're unable to create a kind of consensus framework for governance. Hence, we need to take the reins of the government, and that's kind of when the first coup happens in 1958. There's an election scheduled under Pakistan's first constitution, And the fear also is that the Bengalis, who are the majority of Pakistan, almost 55%, who are less than 5% of the Army Officer Corps, if they win the election, the show is over. So, anyway, this man right here, this invincible man with, you know, his chest puffing up in pride, is the guy who executed Pakistan's last coup. And he says, my dear countrymen, of course the women don't exist, the choice before us was between saving the body, that is the nation, at the cost of losing a limb, which is the constitution. Guess what he did? Yeah, he cut the limb off. Anyway, the Pakistani constitution is an article. You could call it a kind of coup-proofing mechanism. It's called Article 6 that defines anyone who suspends or subverts the Pakistani constitution by a threat or show of force commits high treason, which is punishable by death. And this gentleman right here is now an absconder from justice, hiding in the UAE, the ultimate resort for dictators, along with Saudi Arabia, because for the first time in Pakistan's history, there's a trial, a high treason trial against a former army chief of staff, so he's missing in action. And this is again from the horse's mouth. Musharraf says, the Army's guardian role is rooted in its professional training, which is based on developing patriotism and character, and more than that, a sense of group relationship where a person sacrifices for the benefit of the group. And then as we progress in the Army, this becomes ingrained in us. So what do the generals actually believe, let's say in this current context, or what is the appropriate role and place of the Army in the Pakistani state and society? One, that we're accountable to no one, that we should have all absolute, not relative, absolute autonomy in determining our internal operations, our budgets, and the civilians have no business in lording over us. So that, in order to keep Pakistan's defense effective, civilians should stay out of anything that has to do with the military. They also want to have a monopoly over how Pakistan conducts its security and foreign policy towards its arch rival India, and related to that Afghanistan, the United States, nuclear weapons. There's an apocryphal story that the former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto once asked the CIA to brief her on Pakistan's nuclear program because the army wouldn't let her close to it. Anyway, I don't know how true that is. The other is this enormous commercial empire that, you know, Risa and others were talking about in their presentations yesterday. The Pakistan military makes cereal, produces cement, name it and they make it in the name of welfare of the foundation. So this is another economic kind of commercial interest, which is not the primary driver of their political involvement, but has over time become an important feature of their kind of control over the polity. And in order to ensure all of the above, it's important for the military to kind of dominate civilian institutions and civil society. So this is not the kind of, you know, greedy ogre story where the generals want to grab all the money and run away with it. These are professional soldiers who actually believe this to be true, that for Pakistan's national security to be effective, for Pakistan to be a kind of cohesive state facing a kind of mortal threat from a bigger enemy, and now the Western world, blah, 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 who are after our nuclear weapons, that this is essential for Pakistan's survival and integrity. So let me bring you back, kind of bring you to the recent context of transition to democracy, where Musharraf's authoritarian regime was deposed by, you probably heard of this lawyers movement. This was a Supreme Court judge who said to the general uncharacteristically that he will not resign, because the general asked him to resign because he was proving too big for his shoes. That kicked off a lawyers movement. And the military then carried out what's known in the literature as an extrication coup, which is that the military decides that its institutional integrity lies in extricating itself from power, right? And dumping the dictator. So that's what happened. There was an election right after that. So this is the man who replaced General Musharraf, who then passed baton on to General Rahil Sharif, and now to the current Army Chief, General Qamar Bajwa. But as I forget his first name, Lombardi of the Stanford Prison Experiment fame once said, there are no sweet cucumbers in a vinegar barrel. So what has happened is, although the behavior has changed, the attitudes have not changed. So if norms persist, if these organizational values and ethos persist, we should see that the Pakistan Army should stick to its guns despite the change in the context. I'll just quickly show you General Kiani's argument that military interventions are necessary. They're bypasses. When democracy collapses, you reconstruct it. Pakistan's transition became a threat to the army. There was an election, brought the PPP to power. The parliament passed major constitutional reforms, restoring the federal intent of Pakistan's 1973 constitution, which involved decentralizing substantial administrative and fiscal powers to the provinces. And for the first time, this is Pakistan's landmark, democratic landmark, for the first time in its history, two governments that had completed its tenure actually transferred power. One government that had completed its tenure peacefully transferred power to another elected government that political scientists see as kind of the sign that democracy is beginning to institutionalize. Of course, the military saw that in some ways as a threat. One of the reasons was that the government of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who is in jail right now, pursued the prosecution of General Musharraf. Nawaz Sharif also tried to redirect Pakistan's foreign policy towards India. He also had this fancy illusion that the Pakistani military should stop the use of militants as a tool of national security in India and Afghanistan. And so how does the military now exercise its influence? It's no longer using, sort of iron and blood, and the coup is kind of a thing of the past. What they're trying to do is dominance with a dose of hegemony, so coercion plus consent. One of the ways in which the military has destabilized elected governments, or its intelligence arm, primarily the ISI, is to mobilize virulent Islamist radicals like the Tehreek-e-Labbaik-e-Pakistan, which is a movement that has vowed to protect has a kind of make sure the implementation of blasphemy laws in Pakistan. They accused the government of blasphemy, blockaded the capital for 3 weeks. Then the army came in and gave them money and said, "You're our brothers, you can go home." There's also been a co-optation and coercion of the courts. One of the most kind of dramatic evidence of that is there was a judge videotaped who said, "I can't sleep at night because I wrongfully convicted the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif." And why did you do that? Well, the ISI had a sex tape, and they said they're going to release it to the public, and blah, blah, blah. So they have found ways of both manipulating and coercing the judiciary. There's also a systematic effort to silence dissent. There were, for instance, 3 bloggers who were very critical of the military. They were abducted. 3 weeks later, after a lot of international pressure, they appeared. They were tortured. The media is being suffocated. And the media is in a situation which is unparalleled. Pakistani journalists say even under former military dictatorships, you knew what the lines were. Now it's all the journalists that are critical of the military have been. Pakistan is a boisterous media, 60 private news channels. But the top journalists who are very critical of the establishment can no longer appear on TV, on and on. And then to ensure that the former government of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, the former Prime Minister, doesn't come to power, the Pakistani military blatantly rigged the 2018 elections. The current Interior Minister of Pakistan said on TV 2 weeks ago that if Nawaz Sharif had not angered the military and come to a compromise, he would still be the Prime Minister. So this has nothing to do with his alleged corruption. It has to do with the fact that he has angered the military. And finally, the outcome in Pakistan right now is that it's a hybrid regime with a kind of civilian facade with a puppet prime minister, for lack of a more polite word, that kind of legitimizes the military's control over government by providing it a veneer of legitimacy. So last but not least are the prospects for change, quite bleak. One thing the literature on democratic transition teaches us that you don't need natural born Democrats for democracy to take root. What you need are civilians who in their self-interest, civilian elites in their self-interest, come to a conclusion to play by the rules of the game and to not knock on the military's door every time they have an opportunity. And the good thing in Pakistan's case is that that consensus is evolving. So the 2 main parties, the PPP, former Prime Minister Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif, have resisted the temptation to collude with the military to gain power. They have shown that they're kind of committed to at least this idea in their own self-interest, that not that they're, inherently Democrats. 2, people power is what makes the general sweat in any country. So civil society mobilization in Pakistan is a rich history of civil society contestation of military rule, Ayub Khan's regime in the 60s, Musharraf's regime in the 2000s was brought in civil society contestation was instrumental to getting rid of authoritarianism. The other is an exogenous shock. In the case, in the transitional literature on democratic transitions, we know that defeat in war is usually a shock to the system. The Argentinian military was badly defeated in 1982 in the Falklands, and disgraced and humiliated, had to leave power. In Pakistan's case, it will be some form of, if not the termination of the rivalry, a peaceful management of the rivalry with India will, I think, create the grounds for some kind of normalization of civil-military relations as we understand it in a more democratic direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aqil Shah, for that wonderful presentation. We'll, I think, begin the discussion and debate on these very important issues of the classical kind of antagonism between the civilian politicians and the military rule in Pakistan. Our next speaker is Dr. Ejaz Hussain, who got his PhD from Heidelberg University. He's authored the wonderful work, Military Agency, Politics and the State in Pakistan. And co-edited Perspectives on Contemporary Pakistan, Governance, Development and Environment. He's been a fellow in Fudan University in China, at UC Berkeley in the United States, and has taught at various universities in Pakistan itself. His research interests include civil-military relations, foreign policy analysis, South Asian politics, governance, federalism, and political Islam. He will be speaking today on the impact of military agency on politics and the state in Pakistan. Please welcome Dr. Ejaz Hussain.
Well, before I move on, I would like to thank CIGA, in particular Professor Sami, to invite me here to share my views on Pakistan politics and the state structure. As you can see, mine is also a theoretically oriented understanding of Pakistani civil-military relations starting in 47 onwards. But I'll be very brief in this discussion due to time constraints. I would slightly disagree with Professor Aqil in terms of kind of non-demoting agency. I do believe agency is very essential, at least empirically in the Pakistani case, where I assume that there are actors. There were 4 actors, basically. I'll show you on the next slide. And these actors were rational in terms of having a cost-benefit analysis. And then this relationship between these 4 actors is grounded or framed in principle-agent framework. I actually took a departure from CMR agency theory from Peter Fever. He's an American professor based at Duke. And I assume that in the Pakistani case, there are not just 2, but there are 4 actors. It initially was the politicians and civil bureaucracy, judiciary, and the military. So as per the norm of democratic theory, as well as the constitutionality of the Pakistani state in 1947, when it got independence from the British, it was the politician or the civilians who assumed the principal position. However, within a couple of years, the early leadership passed away, and then the civil bureaucracy, which was a very powerful force, as they call the steel framework of the British Raj, it asserted its agency and assumed powerful position of the principalship of the Pakistani state in October 51. And it ruled the rules for coming years till 58. So in other words, in this early period, I would disagree with a lot of scholarship which assumed the military was a powerful factor in the Pakistani politics. In my view, it remained a junior actor, and it didn't have the inclination to stage a coup d'etat, nor was it capable organizationally to do that. However, in 1958, it's very interesting that the first coup in Pakistan history was staged by a bureaucrat, Iskandar Mirza, right? And he issued the coup proclamation in the name of himself as the president of this new regime, and General Ayub Khan, who was the CNC, or the commander-in-chief, was assigned the role of the chief martial law administrator. Within the next 3 weeks, this bureaucrat, or this chief bureaucrat, he further demoted the general's role, and he appointed him as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. This, in my view, was felt very seriously or kind of derogatory towards the institution, and then they reacted in terms of asserting their agency and assumed principal position in Pakistan politics in October 27, 1958 onward. So during the 1960s, Ayub regime, they ruled the roost, and as Aqil argued, there were remittances, also military aid from the US. So before the 65 war with India, Pakistan economy was quite on the go. There were very positive indicators. But with war with India, it somehow went down. Also, at the 65 election of Ayub Khan generated a lot of stuff for the opposition parties to stage agitational politics in the coming years. So around 68, 69, we got socialists and some politicians, especially Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who had earlier worked with the Ayub regime. He departed his ways and he formed his own political party in 67, I think, or 68. This also speaks rationality or agency on the part of the politicians, that in one context they are siding with the army or the military. In other contexts, they are thinking or acting differently. So Ayub in 68, 69 context, he got very unpopular due to his, I would say, losing alliances with these politicians. And then to protect the institutional interest, the then CNC, General Yahya Khan, he stuck back in terms of his coup d'etat in March 69. Now, very interestingly, the politicians, Socialist and People's Party, they agreed to the Yahya regime-oriented legal framework to participate in electoral exercise, and Pakistan went for election in 1970. Now, as a result of those elections, these two parties, the People's Party and the Awami League, which was based in East Pakistan then, they won massively in each wing of the country. However, there were divergence of choices in terms of transfer of power, which then led to agitational politics in East Pakistan, followed by civil war, in which India played a very active role in terms of the bifurcation of Pakistan. Now, in the post 71 crisis or debacle, once again, it's the civilian led by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who assumed the principalship of the Pakistani state and politics. Now, Bhutto, in my readings, there are a couple of books published with him by Stalin Bhutto, one of them, and Rafi Pirzada from Pakistan is also one author. He was also fellow of Bhutto. Overall, my assessment is that Bhutto was Bonapartist. He loved power, and he tried to demote the agencies of other actors, particularly the army. In that regard, he instituted a number of changes. For example, he inserted Article 6 in the Pakistani 73 Constitution. He also affected the command and control structure of the army or the military. And also he, quote-unquote, reformed the civil bureaucracy. And very interestingly, he established a paramilitary organization called the Federal Security Force, the FSF, in 1962 to protect the prime minister from all other actors. And very interestingly, to avoid a coup, he engaged the military, particularly the army, in Balochistan, away from the capital, in an attempt to ward off any attempt on his life or against the government. However, Bhutto, due to his authoritarian tendencies, he expelled the core socialist component of his party by mid-1974. And afterwards, due to his nationalization policies, other segments of the society, particularly the traders, they also got resentful. So keeping in mind all this context, Bhutto went for re-election in March 1977, which were, according to certain scholars, also the data available, were massively rigged, and it resulted in an agitation politics in parts of the PNA, the Pakistan National Alliance formed in January 1977. So in that context, Bhutto was given kind of choices by the opposition either to go home or hold fresh election. Then there were deliberations going on, and in order to curb those protest deliberations, Bhutto, very paradoxically, he relied on the army in terms of what they call aid to the civil power, or quote-unquote, he imposed martial laws in certain major cities of the country. And in this context, there were a section of politicians, especially from Muslim League, and Tehreek-e-Istiqlal. They invited the army chief then, who was General Zia-ul-Haq, to take over. So that is, in my view, a rationality or agency on the part of the civilian that they're inviting the military to intervene in Pakistani politics. The military being subjected to a agent position in this context, they also wanted to assume the principal position for their own, as Aqil argued, their own appropriate behavior in terms of managing or determining Pakistan's foreign or domestic policy. So we have a third coup in July 1977, and as a result of that, a section of the civil bureaucracy and the politician, also the judiciary, they provided political, legal, and administrative legitimacy to this regime. So Pakistan was led by the Zia-led military regime in the 1980s, in which we had, for example, a very famous episode of the Afghan Jihad. A lot of stories we have already in the media, with American aid coming in. But then overall, I think this period was relatively peaceful internally or domestically for the Pakistani society, with American economic aid or so forth and so on. However, Zia-ul-Haq, during the later phase of the Cold War, he, along with certain American, I think one American ambassador died in that air crash. He died in a mysterious air crash in 1988. So in that context, the then Army Chief, General Aslam Beg, he didn't feel the need to stage a coup or kind of replace the existing structure. He either went for allowing the political class or the politician to go for election. So we had an election in 1988. So from 1988 till 1999, we got around 4 elections, and we got 4 governments led by mainstream political parties, Pakistan Muslim League and People's Party, at that time led by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter, Benazir. So in this period of 1990s, I categorize this as civilian circularity, that we got civilians which assume office, but not necessarily the power, because the power rested under the terms of the 1973 Constitution, and in particular the 8th Amendment introduced by Zia-ul-Haq in 1985 with the presidency. So the presidency, led by Ghulam Ishaq Khan and then Farooq Leghari, they dismiss the civilian governments 4 times in this period. And very importantly, the last government, which was toppled by Musharraf-led military. It was a very interesting case that, in terms of looking at the reason, the factors which made the army to intervene directly in Pakistani politics, and in a context where they didn't intervene directly, for example, in 1989 or 92 or 93, when there was a context available. There were certain measures, in my view, on the part of the then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, which probably invited the military to take over. One of them was that the rule of the game, they were structurally or constitutionally disturbed. The Article 58(2)(b) to the Constitution was repealed by the Nawaz Sharif government in February 1997. And then importantly, the following year, he, well, if I can say so, he kind of compelled or forced the then Army Chief, Iqra, to resign, right? Which had a very negative vibe to the organization, which had ruled Pakistan as the principalship in the preceding decades. And very importantly, in early October 1999, he had a planning. The Prime Minister had the planning to dismiss or get resignation from another Army Chief, Pervez Musharraf. So I think, keeping in mind these 3-4 variables or indicators, the then Army Chief, I think they decided to mark their agency, and then they sent Nawaz Sharif home. I mean, he was sent in exile. But very, very importantly, being a very rational actor, quite unlikely comparatively with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was hanged. Nawaz Sharif, being an industrialist or being very, I would say, different from Bhutto, he did a secret deal with the then military authorities, and he was exiled to London, to Dubai and then to London. So Pakistan in the post-1999 coup period was led by Pervez Musharraf. It was not a favorable context given the American lack of interest in this region. However, there were American interest in Afghanistan after the 9/11, and then there were, as we already know, there were remittances coming into Pakistan, exchequer, the military aid also coming forth. So till 2005 or 6, it was quite good going, domestically speaking. However, Musharraf, by 2007, I think March 2007, as Aqil already mentioned, he had a tussle or power tussle with the then Chief Justice of Pakistan, Iftikhar Chaudhry. Chaudhry had invoked what we call in Pakistan the suo motu, where cases or different nature, some were relating to politicians, some were relating to the military, they were adopted or they were taken on by the Chief Justice himself without any proper mechanism of filing a writ petition. So this led to divergence of choices, and as a result, in November 2007, in my calculation, the last coup occurred. It's not October 1999, because Musharraf did that in the capacity of the army chief. However, due to the prolonged lawyers' movement, which initially might have been independent, but later on it was also supported by a certain section of the security establishment, since, in my view, Musharraf became a liability when he was the president, no longer the army chief. And General Kani played a very effective role in terms of providing space to him to exit from Pakistan. So post-Musharraf, in 2008, we got election in February. So here I can pose a question that did Pakistan or can Pakistan make a transition from a Musharrafian-led political structure to a post-Musharrafian one? And to what extent is it a transition to a liberal or consolidated democracy? So in my view, though we had election in 2008, but People's Party, which formed the government, it won a considerable number of seats in the election on account of the death of Benazir Bhutto. There was a kind of sympathy wave in the country. However, being traditionally an anti-establishment party, People's Party led by Zardari, they initially tried to assert to change their position from an agent actor to be the principal of Pakistani state. And in that regard, I remember that he instructed the then chief of the ISI to visit India, and he also had a video conference to Indian journalists. And then very importantly, he tried to assert in Pakistan's foreign policy, especially in terms of changing the norm of the game in Afghanistan or India. And then the following year, a couple of years, we had in 2011, we got the OBL episode, and it also had kind of very tricky or complicated relation between civilian and the military. So by and large, in that period, though the civil government, it completed its tenure, but due to the military's assertion of agency, they couldn't assume the principal position, right? And they remain as agent actor. With the loss of the prime minister, they were able to complete their tenure. Now, in the following years, in 2013, we got another election in which, quite surprisingly, because that was not my calculation that the PMLN won election that massively, the PMLN formed government in the center and also in Punjab. But here, I think is very new, recent data that led me to reconceptualize the pattern of Pakistani CMR in the contemporary context, which is the hybridization of relationship between the military and the civilian, particularly the politicians. And there are indicators in that regard. One of them is that in the first, it's the first incidence that in the Pakistan political history, despite the earlier unwillingness, or especially Nawaz Sharif, Pakistan got this cabinet committee on national security, right? I think that was probably the reason or factor of differences between Jahangir Khan and Nawaz Sharif. And then there were army operations. They were launched informally Farah. It's a tribal region bordering Afghanistan. Nawaz Sharif government initially was not in favor of allowing the military to do the needful, which was in my view required given the very shaky situation in that region. And then very importantly, there were the tragic incidents on army school in Peshawar in which lots of children got killed. So in that particular context, the civil government provided space to the military in terms of having this national action plan under which a lot of apex committee was formed. They work in tandem with provincial cabinets or the federal cabinet. And then very importantly, constitutionally, the civil government also provided the military codes to the military to try civilian or other suspected actors behind terrorism in Pakistan. Now, on the one hand, which is a paradox, the Nawaz Sharif, he was appeasing the military, which was still a principal actor in Pakistan politics. But on the other hand, as they say, the old habits they never die. He did some kind of measures, institutional or informal, where he tried to curtail the role of the Pakistani military in politics. One of them is that he did not allow that much space to the military in terms of allocation of resources under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Secondly, he tried to control the military through social media, and in that regard, his daughter was very effective initially. And then, very importantly, he intervenes in the internal mechanism of the military in terms of promotion and appointments, which I think was a serious variable that in language or in words of one retired Pakistani military officers, quote unquote, Nawaz Sharif wanted to transform the military or wanted to have the military as the Punjab police. The Punjab police here refers to the civil bureaucracy, one component of the civil bureaucracy. So, so they asserted, the military, they asserted their power in terms of then initially kind of signaling very strategically to Imran Khan or Dr. Thakur Qadri to do protest politics in 2014. Nawaz Sharif somehow survived that, and then there were Panama Papers and then the Dawn Leaks. He survived all these, but nonetheless he got somehow convicted by the Pakistani Supreme Court in the Panama Papers, where he finally landed in jail. So in the current context, I'll consume just 2 more minutes. We have 2018 election in which Imran Khan's PTI formed government in the center and also in 2 provinces. But the PTI, in my view, is also a rational actor. It relied on the military for strategic support, but on the other hand, it has its own agenda. It's there for the last 22 years. But overall, I would argue that it is still an agent actor. Imran Khan is an agent actor, or the politician led by him. And currently, his government has been threatened by the opposition political parties, especially Maulana Fazlur Rahman's Jamaatul Ulama Islam. It's a religious political party. And overall, the hybridity consolidates with measures adopted by this government as well. For example, the CCNN stays, the NAP is also there, established, and then very recently, another institution which is called the National Economic Council is established just recently, and then we got a CPEC authority in which probably the military officials would have more role to play. And then also the military, as was in history, it formulates Pakistan foreign policy. So by and large, there was neither transition no transformation of Pakistan civil military relationship or the principal agent structure that we have since 1977. So since 1977, in my view, the military stays as a powerful actor or as the principal actor. So overall, what we have resultantly is a de facto democracy. It's one of the categories, one of the types of democracy that we have, along with liberal, consolidated, or other types. So these are the following are the indicators of this de facto democracy. So in my view, until or unless there is a consensus or elite consensus, especially initially among the civilians, the politicians, and then the military, to put Pakistan in a track which is democratic, which is preferring a larger interest of the society, Pakistan's stalemate is going to continue in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ejaz Hussain, again enlightening us about the history of this, and gives you a broad, sweeping overview of the various regimes, whether military and civilian, that have entered into the political domain, and what impact that has had, what their legacies have been, all the way to the present. So thank you very much for that. Our final speaker is someone very near and dear to me, Dr. Rasul Bakhsh Rais, who's a colleague and a mentor at the Lahore University of Management Sciences in Lahore, Pakistan. He is one of the leading political scientists from Pakistan, in Pakistan, and he has authored such numerous publications, wonderful books, of which I'll just mention the latest, Imagining Pakistan, Modernism, State in the Politics of Islamic Revival, and Islam, Ethnicity, and Power Politics, Constructing Pakistan's National Identity. Other than that, incredibly useful works and kind of my own work on Afghanistan earlier on, and I must say that he was a pioneer in many of these areas, writing in an academic way on these subjects against the wave of kind of sensational journalism. But the incredible point is Professor Rasul Bakhsh remains so active and prolific in his columns, and he was just telling me earlier on, where he's writing for. So one of the most influential voices, I would argue, in Pakistan today, and it's quite a privilege for us, quite a privilege for me personally, to have him here. In addition, as I was saying earlier, what the CIGA allows is for many of us who are not in contact, but come here and spend more time with each other than even we would in the same country, in the same city. Dr. Louis Safi is there, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasul. These are all old friends that we now get a chance to meet, and the same with Dr. Rasul Bakhsh. So please, Dr. Rasul Bakhsh, let's welcome Dr. Rasul Bakhsh.
Dr. Junaid, fellow panelists, members and colleagues of CIGA, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. In my presentation, I'm going to explore for a few minutes why the idea of Pakistani state has been contested. Those who are familiar with the history of Muslim nationalism and the struggle for the rights of minority Muslims and how it transformed into a demand for a separate country would know that although there has been a consensus on a separate Muslim state in subcontinent in the later part of 19th century, beginning with that. But then what kind of state it would be, and after creation, what kind of state it must be, remains and has been a contested issue. That is a subject I have explored in Imagining Pakistan. Particularly in the case of the civil-military relationships, I explore more on what has happened under the shadow rather than explaining in this presentation how this shadow emerged and why it became so dense. I'm looking particularly on its effects. But before I go to the last 5 slides on the effects, the question of transition and why democratic transition has been troubled, let me also contribute a little bit to what my colleagues have said about why military has emerged as a very dominant political institution, and I share this idea with them. We had 4 military regimes. I believe that by itself, Pakistan provides a big sociological lab in order to draw certain parallels, certain patterns, and also explain why these 4 different military coups have taken place at different points of time. I don't think that there has been any comparative study. There are historical descriptive studies, but not a comparative study of circumstances, economy, military structures, so many things that one can bring into discussion of the 4 coups that have taken place. But then I have a little bit of a dominant idea with a common institution, and that common institution, the military assuming a role of shaping, making, reshaping, structuring, restructuring, orienting and giving some coherence to the state, the idea of the state that they had in their mind. Ayub Khan's is very important in the sense that that was an age where developing a state and nation in post-colonial world were very important, and whether or not the society, the political community, the polity were prepared for that or not. And the dominant view among those scholars who studied civil-military relations in the initial stage was that perhaps militaries would provide stability, order, and also would provide economic development, and then economic development would produce democracy. We have to wait for democracy. This has been a dominant theme, at least among the three military dictators, Ayub Khan, Zia-ul Haq, and Pervez Musharraf. I don't want to talk about Yahya Khan, what happened during that time, but of course, military has to take responsibility for making a commitment, holding an election, and not transferring power to the majority party. I believe that Islamizing the state, and then if you look at enlightening the state, and these three very important military leaders who ruled Pakistan for about a decade each, had altogether a very different idea about how Pakistani state could be conceived and could be developed. I don't think that the idea of an Islamic state that Zia-ul Haq Sahab promoted and the idea of a development state are, and I think Musharraf wanted to be in the same ideological frame of mind as was Ayub Khan. I think that this slide is important, that I talk about balance of power and unending shift. Here the question is that, is the balance of power within the society shifting towards the civilian sector, or just shifting towards the military? Does it remain the same? On some issues that I have here basically mentioned, the crisis of state and nation building, it's unending. I don't think that Pakistan, the different elements, because of ethnicity, because of religious diversity, sectarian conflict, so many things that happen in the state, there is a consensus, except on some document, and that is very important, constitution that I talked about later. We don't have a consensus on what kind of state and nation Pakistan would like to be. Regional threat perceptions, again, I think that there are variations across the ethnicities in Pakistan and also across the political institutions. I don't think that there is a common threat, whether the enemy is within us, the enemy is outside, how much is the enemy within us, and how much is the enemy outside. A national security paradigm, again, I later on talk about it, the guardian of the state. It is being questioned at least, but it remains very important as far as those constituencies in Pakistan are concerned that have been the constituency of the military governments. Pakistan ideology, religion, and identity issues remain on the agenda of political and social discourses. I don't think that we have reached a consensus on this. Defense pact capabilities, these are very important factor, and I think Aqil, Shah, and others have talked about a lot. Military and society is also a very important subject. There have been transformations that I would like to little bit mention. Historically, the recruitment base had been Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. For historical reasons, if you look at what was the representation of Bengalis or East Pakistanis, now Bangladeshis, in the post-partition Pakistan armed forces, and then what it was when East Pakistan became Bangladesh, it is quite significant. That has got to do with the recruitment policies of the British, and I think in many times, many hundred times, the recruitment of Bengalis in officer corps had increased after the partition. And same was true in the civil bureaucracy. Before partition, their representation in these two important institutions was negligible because of their role in the 1857 revolution against the British, or whatever the rebellion was. For a very long time, the conversation in Pakistan has been that Pakistan military is essentially Pashtun and Punjabi. First Punjabi, then Pashtun. Structurally, it has changed during the past 30 years. My own interviews within the military and outside indicate that Pashtuns are more than their representation in the population, and Sindhis and Balochis, who were historically, say, not really deliberately because of historical circumstances, neglected, they are close to their proportion in the population. So there is a national base to the military. And the military itself has realized that by providing that agency to the younger people to be the part of the military establishment means that they have ownership of the national institution. Popular perceptions about the political class and democratic regimes, I share the thoughts that Aqil Shah really talked about the norms and perceptions. They continue to be the same. And of course, that has created a new kind of polarization between the civilian polity and the security establishment. They don't seem to be at the same page. And of course, it is not the norms of the military that are generally accepted in the civil society. And of course, the ideas of the civil society that military is responsible for what has happened is not accepted by the other. Political polarization, crisis, and military intervention, they are linked. Military as the strongest and popular national institution remains a historical fact that we cannot really dismiss when we talk about democratic transitions in the countries. Let me look at some of the legacies. Again, what kind of state and what kind of a nation Pakistan wanted to be? There has been a consensus among the political elite in Pakistan that a federal, democratic, and a parliamentary constitution is the best guarantee for national integration, for national cohesion, and that is the path Pakistan must be marching on. In contrast to that, 4 military regimes, and even today, within the military establishment, the thought is that the parliamentary form of government and this kind of democracy, which has institutionalized the powers of dynastic political parties or political dynasties, is not good for Pakistan, right? And one military regime threw all the 2 previous constitutions into the dustbin. How much time do we have? Okay. But then Ziaul Haq and Musharraf did the same thing as Ayub Khan had done. Ayub Khan went for a presidential form of government. Not that the elections were not held. Elections were held. In 1954 elections, provincial elections in Pakistan were held. When Ziaul Haq when Musharraf, before that Ayub Khan, elections were regularly held. Political parties were allowed after some time. But then what was the major transformation was in the character of the constitution from a parliamentary one to either a presidential or a semi-presidential form of government. Military had a willful, deliberate policy of fragmenting political parties. Why? Because they wanted to create king's parties or a political facade for the reasons that democracy has much stronger root in Pakistani society compared to any Muslim countries. Managing the elections, that has been one way of dealing with the political parties that had been opposed to the military rules. And I think during this time, they have been in power 30-40 years, broadening the social base. I believe that military today, when it is not even in power, and whenever it was in power, it allied itself with a section of the media, always a section of the media in the print as well as in the electronic has supported military regimes. A middle class, they have found tremendous support in that, and feudal politicians who control the parliamentary constituencies, they have been allies of the military. You know, where did the political journey of Mia Nawaz Sharif Saab started? Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was with a military regime for 11 years. Feudal and the business community have also been allies of the military regime. Military, I believe, is a dominant institution. And then we can raise a question that, is that the reason for the stunted growth of democratic institution, or there is something very generic to the society or to the political society that is associated with democratic ethos? These are some of the things that have been highlighted here, but I don't want to discuss them because we can take them during the question hour sessions. I don't think that this can be dismissed very easily, particularly the economic clout of the military officers. When they are in power and when they are not in power, they have got tremendous stake. And what is, in Pakistan, we can say that, well, what is wrong in establishing military universities under the military control? I mean, it doesn't seem to be a problem. If there are more students being educated, that's not a problem. But the real issue is that why should military be establishing universities of its own? There are about 6, 7 universities today. I think it is quite a normal thing that the military would have institutions like National Defense University, where the officer corps is taught, but then it is something else if they start an undergraduate program, an MPhil program, and a PhD program. What does it mean? Is it a part of playing a role in national development, or it is something about a narrative, about an ideology, or about an idea of nationalism or patriotism? And we have a very long history of universities like Turkey. My alma mater, Punjab University, was established in 1980s. Right? Government College Lahore was established before that. And there are civilian institutions and universities that have been established. But it's not just the universities, but then there are think tanks. There is hardly any think tank on security issues in Pakistan which functions on its own. All the security-related think tanks are either directly funded by the government, either through the Ministry of Information or through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then also by the military itself. So in Islamabad and wherever the security discourse takes place, the other views are drowned, and I don't think that they get the kind of expression that it requires in a democratic society. Troubled democratic transition, I believe that if you have military governments and fragmentation of political parties, management of elections, then democratic transitions becomes trouble. It can't be smooth. It becomes rough, and it becomes uncertain, primarily because of the institutions that would sustain democratic transition have been fragmented. Right? Political parties, elections, parliament, assemblies, media, civil society, these are the institutions that really matter in democratic transitions. But if they have been manipulated, that will make the transition questionable, and it might be shadowed by other interests. Soft interventions behind the shadows has always been the case. Domination over critical national policy issues, I believe that one has to accept the fact that is in Pakistan. A role of intelligence agencies, domestic policy, election loyalties, parties. I don't think that is 100% a factor in determining the outcome of elections in Pakistan. But then where few thousand votes or even few hundred votes can make a difference in a parliamentary democracy, I believe some kind of influence, extraneous influence, may be a factor. And I believe if there is something else that makes the difference between 2013 elections and 2018 election is particularly this factor. The problem of consolidation with political transfer of power, it is partial. I don't think it has ever been total. Partial in the sense that there are certain critical areas of national policy that still remain the preserve of the military establishment. 4 ideas, then I will leave. The questioning the role of the military. For the first time, and this is where Mia Nawaz Sharif has been targeted. I believe that he is involved in corruption in a big way. In his family, I don't think that he is innocent. And how you explain his palaces, how the money got transferred to England, there is no paper trail. And then, why would Prime Minister of Pakistan or his family have bank accounts or companies in Panama? He was not alone. There are about 500 more Pakistanis as well. But then what is important and what makes him relevant to Pakistan is his narrative. His narrative is that military is what is behind his removal, and he is innocent. And his narrative has been very crisply and very sharply and very persistently taken out by his daughter, Maryam Nawaz. I mean, she is a person has to be feared by the military establishment in future, because that narrative is very popular within the middle class, within the educated people, and particularly with the left-oriented progressive people who always saw Mia Saab as a protege of the military establishment in the past. Today, they see him as the man who can really shift the balance between the civil and military relations. The second thing is the internal and national security alternative narratives. I mean, there were a lot of discussion yesterday, which are very important areas where military is done. Internal security is one of them. Just a minute or two. Internal security, and I will give you my own anecdote. In 2013, I think, I was appointed as Director General Institute of Strategic Studies. And Sartaj Aziz Saab, who was a foreign minister, he called me up that, would you like to take up this job? I didn't want to quit my job in LUMS, but he said, well, this is a very important institution. And outrightly he said that we need to formulate a national security policy. Can you help us with that? Mia Saab came primarily with the idea that he will write the national security policy of Pakistan, internal and external. So I had meetings with the interior minister who is in charge of internal security, and he asked me to write the first draft of the national security policy, which I did. And they told me that we are going to have this secretariat and national security advisor and this and that and that, right? Within few months' time, and one more thing that I would like to tell you. Interior Minister told me that we have almost concluded an agreement with the Taliban. And they had constituted a committee which was negotiating with the Taliban, right? And people who knew these things knew that what happened afterwards, within few months' time, few weeks' time, there was a military action in South Waziristan, and then, it started. And then everything, National Security Advisor was no longer Sartaj Aziz Sahab, but I think it was General Janjoa who was brought. So let me conclude with this point. I'm raising this question, hybrid or democratic regime. But then also, if you look at the shadow and the history of Pakistan and all these contested issues, I think it is more saner and also a pragmatic and rational approach that it has to be a gradual transformation rather than radical one that Mia Sahab attempted it 2-3 times, and he has failed. So I believe that if you look at the cumulative balance of social and economic forces, and if we continue with this, what kind of, if you call it hybrid regime, or an accommodationist regime with the military next 5 years, 10 years, 7 years, and the quality of democracy in Pakistan, depending on that, I think there will be a shift towards democracy in Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rasul Bakhsh Rais, for pointing out some of these contradictions and tensions that have existed perennially within the Pakistani polity. Before we open it up to the audience for Q&A, I'd like to kick off the discussion with just a very simple, brief questions for our distinguished panelists. First for Dr. Aqil Shah, who spoke about the Praetorianism of Pakistan's military and the legacy of that. One of the things he spoke about is the perceived, these perceptions of on the one hand, the politicians who are lazy, corrupt, don't get things done, uneducated, versus the military, which at least has some internal discipline and coherence to its very ethos. So the question that is raised is, who has this perception? Who are we speaking about? Are we speaking about Western pundits and commentators, the whole Islam industry, Pakistan industry that's developed around these questions? Are we speaking about the Pakistani populace, which of course, I mean, it's has obviously differences of opinion, but certainly it's been true within the dominant, most populated province of Punjab, where clearly this perception has also been, ingrained. And I think the pure kind of answer that it's ideological indoctrination over years and years, that may be insufficient to explain this phenomena that exists. So I think that's a fundamental question. Who has these perceptions of the Pakistani military versus the civilian politicians and so on and so forth? I think that would be great if you can kind of elaborate on that. And just the second thing, thinking about, particularly when we got to the contemporary period, and Dr. Aqil Shah spoke about Pervez Musharraf and, of course, the ongoing kind of perception of military rule is the crushing of dissent. And I was just thinking of an example, leading journalist and commentator in Pakistan, Najm Sethi, who has been, of course, very, as Dr. Rasul Bakhsh Rais was saying, many of these who before had a beef with Nawaz Sharif because of, clearly it wasn't simply the military using many of the groups, it was clearly the politicians in the Punjab that were clearly benefiting from the role of these radical militant groups as well in silencing all dissent. So the example of Najm Sethi, a liberal commentator in Pakistan who was jailed by the Nawaz Sharif regime and was going to receive the death penalty basically, and now becoming an overt fan. What explains this phenomena? And on the other hand, the fact that when you speak about the opening up, the perestroika and all of these of Pakistan, why is it the case that all the way up until the Musharraf period, we were stuck with one Pakistani TV channel, PTV, and then an explosion of these channels happens under military rule? What is the explanation of this? So one of the concerns that people have when we just make the dichotomy between military and civilian is that, are these civilians, politicians really interested in kind of principled, consistent, democratic values, in quotations, whatever that means? And so that has been one of the things that has perplexed many analysts of this situation, and why many have kind of bought into this narrative about, and seen some merit in it, that these politicians, there's no consistency, no principles. Nawaz Sharif was one thing in the 1980s and 90s, and now he's the arch defender of liberal secularism, and the next day, whatever power demands and how we can get in bed with whatever power, whether internal or external, he will go that way as well. So these are questions that we have to ask. And one of them you can also respond to, but I'll ask from Dr. Rasul Bakhsh Rais. But let me turn to Dr. Ejaz Hussain for a second. And one of the things that's always fascinated me is the historical amnesia that often exists in examining the actual empirical practice and actions of civilian political regimes versus the military regimes. And you spoke at length about the Bhutto period, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who, you know, most Pakistanis have tremendous kind of respect for, who came as this kind of very popular leader. But the fact remains that as this first kind of civilian elected, it was his reliance especially on the military for, first of all, coming to power in the first place, in which he effectively was complicit with the military in denying the popular democratic vote of the East Pakistanis. He benefited from that, and therefore he remained silent in what was going on in East Pakistan at that time, which would become Bangladesh, because the Bangladeshi political party, the Awami, they would then win. So he was silent so that his party could win. And then precisely at the time where analysts say that maybe, and again, I may not share this view, but when the military could have been sent back to the barracks because of the low morale, the low popularity after the 71 fiasco and debacle in Bangladesh, Bhutto and the PPP had that opportunity, but again, continuing that reliance, he relied precisely, when you were speaking about the crushing of dissent, on that military to go first in Balochistan, then NWFP, to topple these provincial governments. And then this very popular leader, by the end of his rule, you know, you don't have, when Ziaul Haq he takes over, why is it that you don't have mass kind of demonstrations and protests protecting him from what's going on? And then, of course, later on emerges during the Zia period. But he still probably remains one of the most popular leaders in Pakistan's history. But it was a very sad case in which, of course, he was, you know, relying precisely on it. So these are some of the things that I would like you to speak about, the contradictions, the Bonapartism, as you say, that eventually led to his kind of very close alignment with that same military that we expect kind of civilian politicians to quote-unquote challenge. So I'd like you to kind of speak to that issue. And finally, for Ustaz Rasul Bakhsh Rais, I mean, two things. One is a very simple question, and I think it, even though the contexts are very, very different, and we can kind of speak in that, but I think one of the basic elementary questions that probably the audience may have in their minds is, what is the fundamental problem with the military being involved in the economy versus the civilians? So, I mean, with your breadth of kind of knowledge of the history of Pakistan and the evolution kind of a capitalist industrial class within Pakistan itself, what have been the fundamental differences between those individuals, the civilian participation in kind of economics and entrepreneurship and so on, versus the military involvement? So, because, you know, I think for ordinary Pakistanis, it's kind of the common sense, in the Gramscian sense, that, you know, this is how they've grown up, you know, where the Fauji Foundation and all of these, the cereals and so on. So number one is that, and like I said, that, you know, the other context we were speaking a lot about is the Egyptian context in which the military is involved. And the second was the very interesting history, or historiography, rather appropriately, on these ideologies of the various military regimes. So one can, in broad sweep, speak about Islamic modernism under Ayub Khan's military dictatorship, in which, you know, an individual like Fazlur Rahman, the great modernist scholar, he was the first Director General of the Islamic Research Institute. So, you can speak about that. You can then go to General Ziaul Haq, the conventional, the quote-unquote Islamization, although, again, going back to the Bhutto period, one can reasonably make the argument that that really began under Bhutto. And then moving on to the Musharraf period, in which the project of enlightened moderation and the neoliberal kind of, and he even called himself the chief executive officer, and of course the opening up of media and so on. So these different ideological orientations that have existed, and in fact the civilian, very kind of, in Musharraf it was very clear, Pervez Hoodboy, many other progressives initially welcomed, liberals, all of these kind of welcomed Musharraf precisely because of this project. One of the kind of leading theologians, Javed Ahmed Ghamdi, very much, and Mohammed Khalid Massoud, these modernists were part of the Islamic Ideology Council. And then you get the progressive so-called Pakistan People's Party that comes into party, gets rid of Khalid Massoud Saab and all of these, puts in kind of a reactionary. So it's part of this theme of the historical amnesia. When we do an analysis and assessment of whether it's civilian and politician, it's almost kind of, we don't look at the actual practice and facts. We just go, mechanically. One is kind of superior to the other, or more progressive, or more modernist. When in fact, the facts may speak to the opposite. So I'd like you to address these questions, and I'll give it to Dr. Aqil Shah. Yes. Oh, then they can do it then. Is that okay? Yeah, we can. Wonderful. Okay. Sorry, I took up most of the time. Let's see. Please. Right here? Yes. Oh, do we get the mic? Here. This is third row.
Assalamu alaikum. It was a very informative session. I'm Dr. Fawzia Siddiqui from Pakistan, and I have a question for Dr. Rais. He ended on the note, a hybrid or democratic regime currently in Pakistan. And just taking that forward, if we look over the past 1 year, any visit that our Prime Minister makes to a foreign country, he's always accompanied by the Chief of Army Staff. And does that mean that our foreign policy is now being shifted towards a totally different institution? That's my first question. And my other question is to Dr. Aqil Shah. You're outside Pakistan. You're in the US. And looking from there, would you agree or disagree with a statement that Pakistan currently is it's kind of transitioned into a silent civil martial coup? And that would be, I think, enough for me.
Wonderful. Thank you. My dear Algerian friend right here. Right here. Yes.
Thank you. I have just a quick comment. At one time, the first speaker mentioned the issue of corruption, which is very crucial in civil-military relations. And you said at one time that it is universal. You give example of Senator US and British. Sure, it is true. But there is one big difference. What is the nature and the content of this corruption? Corruption in the Western society does not go abroad. The senator, invests.
What about Trump? It doesn't go abroad?
Let me finish, please. The senator invests the money to create job. The Arab sheikhs or the Pakistani generals, transfer the money in Western bank. It is against the national interest. In another word, corruption within the civil-military relations, it is not dysfunction of the regime. It is a structural element of the system. And as long as we do not understand and develop studies in this direction, it is very hard to understand the issue. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, thank you. 1 second, let me look for a female. Yeah? Ejaz, yes, Dr. Ejaz.
May I have Chair's permission to take 2 minutes? It's a slightly longer comment.
Possibly.
First comment was to Dr. Rasul Bakhsh Rais. Number of universities in military universities in the U.S. is close to 41, and the number of think tanks, total number of think tanks, may be about 120, out of which more than half have a lot of military personnel. So these are purely universities like West Point, as well as National Defense University in Washington, but all of the others as well, in which the U.S. military actually has some kind of RAND is, that's a think tank, yeah. But total number of universities, so I just checked on the internet while you spoke. My main comment is for Aqil Shah. I was very disappointed. Yeah. The total discreditation of an institution, not very objective at all. And the old discourse, this is not a new discourse. I mean, we're used to it. We're sick of this discourse. And it's based on a very poor understanding of Pakistan's history and based on poor understandings of facts as well, such as you say that Pakistan started all the wars. We can talk about that. The reality is this. Can I first ask a question? You'll have your time to... No, it's not a tirade. It seems to you. We sat through 15 minutes of your tirade. Now you must sit through 1 minute of my tirade, okay? Now, here, in 2011, the military's approval rating was 86% in Pakistan. Financial institutions rating was 58%. Judicial systems rating was 56%. Local police rating was 32%. National civilian governments that you cheerlead, their approval rating was 28%. And about the Election Commission, which is a civilian body, their approval rating was 19%. Now, according to the poll that I conducted myself, the approval rating with the military was way above 90%. All right. So now I come to this, that why does the Western institutions, Western liberals, this discourse is a liberal discourse that emanates out of the Western quarters. It says that, that there is a liberalism-terrorism connection, and the reason why the liberals hate Pakistani military is following. One, it is the vanguard of the Islamic ideology. Islamic beliefs and values which are shared, as I read you in the poll, by the people, okay? Number two, we have had a transnational foreign policy in which we have fought wars in Cyprus, we have fought wars alongside with the Arabs and downed Israeli planes. That's why they hate us, okay? Number three, we have nuclear weapons. They hate us for that. They don't like the Pakistani military as a custodian of nuclear weapons. Number four, the military itself is the biggest blockade against democratic fascism. Read John Pilger's The Rise of Democratic Fascism in the World, and I'll make the point. Now, parliamentary democracy is probably one of the worst forms of governments. It's not even working in Britain. So don't tell us in Pakistan that parliamentary democracy is the best form of government for you. Thank you.
No, 1 second. I'm looking. Any women have any questions in the audience? No? Dr. Abdullah Hassan. Sorry, General, please. Very briefly, though, we're running out of time. Yeah. I was looking. Yeah, I'm looking.
I must first go on record and say I am a retired general from the Pakistan Army. So bear with me if you find it difficult for me to be objective. I can say the same about politicians, that they are not objective. So first of all, this democracy thing, we ought to understand that the Western version, as it has now become the dominant system, developed over centuries. It didn't develop overnight. It's a finished product that we are supposed to adapt to. But the processes that it went through, we want to jump across those processes, jump across that time and become like them. It's not possible. It will take time. Secondly, there is a deep state that developed during the colonial period in all these Western countries that modulated the transformation to democracy. there is no deep state in some of these countries that have emerged out of colonial system. So, perforce, the last resort for stability is not the deep state, but the military. So it has to intervene to stop anarchy or to stop a slide which will result in the loss of statehood.
Yes.
So military as representing the deep state compulsion, not an option, has to ensure that some kind of continuity goes on. But to ascribe to it evil as scheming and planning is not the Pakistani context. That the generals are always trying to scheme and plan that within the next 3 years, we'll take over, and this is the most dreadful decision they have to take as a professional military. But when it does happen, it's a comment. I'm sorry.
Do we have? Yes. My Sudanese friend, please.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm privileged to have long sessions of discussions on Pakistani issues since 1990, when we first pumped up to congratulate Nawaz Sharif on his first election. And then I had a long relations with the NDU and Iqra in Jordan and in Pakistan. I shared with what Professor Rasul had to say about the Pakistan as an idea. And I got the feeling that the military always subscribed to this idea, and they pose themselves as the guardians of the red lines. And the politicians or the civilians are always compromising on these red lines. So there is a feeling that they are the protectorate of the idea, the grand idea of Pakistan, because the idea preceded the context of Pakistan as a country. Thank you.
We're running out of time. Dr. Abdullah, yes, that's right. But please keep it brief. Thank you very much. Jazakallah. Right here, quickly. No.
Thank you for looking at me, at least. I know you oversight. My question is very simple. Pakistan and India were together before 47. They were divided in 47. India has never had a military coup, a democratic country with so many diversity in it, and it has been progressing. What is the difference between Pakistan and India?
Jazakallah, thank you. Since we're running out of time, don't worry, people. There's ample more panel discussions. We're running out. I'm sorry. We will definitely get you an opportunity to speak. Don't worry. All of you. No, we cannot. I'm sorry. I will have now our panelists respond to the questions out there. You don't necessarily have to, please, respond to me. Please take their questions and make them your primary. Please, Dr. Kicha.
So I don't even want to, sorry.
Can we have decorum?
This gentleman here who said that I did not have facts, and then he created some of his own facts by citing a poll, which I hope you would show me where you conducted it, what was your methodology, what was your sample, 1, 2. You read it. You said you did it.
That's the second one.
Oh. Yeah, okay. One thing. Okay. Now, well, hang on. High public trust in the military does not in any way translate into support for military authoritarianism. 1. So you're correlating public trust in the institution somehow as a license for what the military is doing is completely nonsense, to put it very politely. Who else? Yeah, let me answer some of the more reasonable question. Democracy, fascism, you are the fascist here. You are saying that democracy is fascist? Where did you come up with this? One book that you probably read? Yeah, come on, man, relax. Yeah. You have advocated for totalitarianism as a recipe for economic development. I don't know which alternative universe you live in. You think Nazi Germany was good for economic development? You need a reality check and maybe a mental check. Okay, hang on. Okay, so 2 questions from you. Yes, Pakistan is a hybridized military regime where the military is the de facto. The army chief of staff is the finance minister, the foreign minister, the minister of everything else. So it is you could call it a kind of, it's not direct martial law, but it's military rule by other means. I would kind of, the corruption question, absolutely, corruption is bad. The politicians in Pakistan are corrupt and they should be held accountable for it. The problem is they are only held accountable for their corruption when they challenge the military. Nawaz Sharif would still be in power if he had not done the things that he was doing that was angering the military. So yes, corruption is bad, but why is it that when the military comes to power, it hires the most corrupt politicians? Right now, the government of Imran Khan has some of the most tainted, corrupt politicians of Pakistan who have been in every regime. So yes, corruption is a big problem. It's not peculiar to Pakistan. India has corruption, Bangladesh has corruption, political corruption is a deep and endemic issue, but the national security establishment in many countries uses the politics of corruption to its own instrumental advantage, not because it wants to eradicate corruption. There is institutionalized corruption within the Pakistan military, within many other authoritarian militaries, that they justify in the name of, oh, we're guarding the state, hence we should have more land. We found a very novel way of defending the motherland by grabbing it. So, there you go. Yeah, okay.
Now we have Dr. Ejaz Hussain.
Well, luckily, I have only one question to address. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, I think he was, he had a psychologically contradictory tendencies. Right. So the reason that he felt isolated by the end of his term is that he expelled the core socialists from his party, and then he relied on the landed feudal, he was part of institutionally of that institution. So that's the fundamental reason that he had expelled people from his party. And secondly, he was also nationalist. His is the era where the defense budget comparatively got increased from 72 till 77. So on the one hand, he was projecting India as a threat to Pakistani sovereignty. On the other hand, he deployed army far away in Balochistan, as you mentioned, toppled governments, provincial governments over there. So at the end of the day, when his party is weakened, he has been isolated from other political parties. He didn't develop alliances with other parties. So at the end of the day, he was all isolated. So he then relied to curb the agitation politician or to govern the country in 77 in particular. He relied on the army. So that's my take on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Rasul Bakhsh.
Okay, I will be very brief. Your question about ideology and the variation on the military regime is very important because one thing that is the military. But then why a choice of particular ideology at a given point of time? I think each of the three wanted to address a particular social and political constituency. That is very important. Ayub Khan wanted to create a modernist constituency around development, and the middle class elite joined him from bureaucracy, from business, and from military, from civil bureaucracy. Look at, you made reference to outstanding scholar Dr. Fazlur Rahman. But Dr. Fazlur Rahman was writing the script of what kind of Muslim society Pakistan should be under Ayub Khan. Jamaat-e-Islami at that time launched personal attacks against Fazlur Rahman and drove him out of the country, and he sought refuge at the University of Chicago, where he produced outstanding scholars. It is the same Jamaat-e-Islam. So it was not a military government. The character of the military government, it was the kind of ideology that Ayub Khan was pursuing. The Jamaat-e-Islami became an ally of Ziaul Haq and remained his ally through the Afghan jihad and for 8, 9, 10 years. So therefore, we have to look at the issue of constituency and how you seek legitimacy and how you mobilize a particular section of the society as a political facade. I'm coming to that. I will come to the last. Dr. Fawzia's foreign policy and security policy. I don't think that the Chief of Army Staff has been on every visit, but he has played a very critical role in two areas of foreign policy. One is how to rethink Pakistan's Afghan policy, because no civilian government in Pakistan could do it without taking military on board. Imran Khan was the only politician staging a demonstration, long march, going to the borders of South Waziristan, where he was stopped, and he protested against military action, and till today he says that military action was a bad option against the tribal people, right? So within the military establishment, I think there has been reflection, self-reflection on Afghan policy. There is a change, in my assessment. There is a fundamental shift in Pakistan's foreign policy towards Afghanistan, and this is as a result of understanding and accommodation between the civilian and the military sectors. The second, I think, very important issue was how to mend fences with the United States. We live in a very different kind of world. Imran Khan's public position had been anti-American from the very beginning. Right? He took anti-American position almost on every issue. So he was not really suited to mend fences with the United States. I think we used the agency of the military establishment to improve relations with the United States. Even when the relations between the civilians and the American government have been very bad, there have been good relations on the level of intelligence, and between Pentagon and GHQ and Rawalpindi, they have been in a kind of some relationship. Issue of corruption. You know, corruption is something, but a systematic, organized way to pull the economy down for a political purpose, for a political project is something else. I think I have no time to explain to you what was the energy policy that Benazir Bhutto had pursued and how it really destroyed the Pakistan industrial base. I don't want to get into it, but just to give you one thing, that if the international prices per unit were 6 cents, with the IPPs, the power purchase agreements were done at 13 cents. Fuel will be purchased, which is variable in the international market, by the Pakistani state. And then what really damaged Pakistan's energy production, it made it costly for the Pakistani industry. It is why it's closed down. That the energy that is produced will be purchased on the basis of capacity. So if the unit has been established for 600 megawatts, even if it is producing 0, because Pakistan cannot afford the 4 times increase in the fuel prices, and it is better not to run but pay for 600 megawatts. So it became such a problem. Corruption is systematic in an organized way because it will have ramification for civil-military relations, that Pakistan will not be able to sustain a military defense in a very strategic competition with India. It was well designed. And Hussain Haqqani, your friend, and my friend, and many others were behind this scheme, and this has been going up. It will take a lot of time to get out of that. That kind of corruption that we are talking about. About Ejaz, as a social scientist, I think we had to realize that who dominates the social and political discourses in the society, right? So I'm not against military as an institution, because without military as an institution, we cannot exist in a very hostile environment. No country in the world, and particularly in the circumstances, geopolitical locations, historical circumstances, we need a strong military. We have support for that. But then what is important, what goes by the foundational thoughts of Pakistan, is a constitutional democratic state, right? For creating a democratic constitutional state, it is very important that we have a shared idea of a national state, a shared idea of national security, a shared idea of a good society, a shared idea of a law, a shared idea of respective jurisdictions and spheres of influence within each society. I think it is quite deliberate. I have my personal experience. It is deliberate to not to allow critical social and political discourses when it comes to national security narrative. So, security is as important from my point of view, as is important from the point of view of soldier. I'm a citizen and a soldier and citizen are two of the same people, belong to the same state. So we should not think that we have quite an opposite interest. We have a common interest. We have same land, same Pakistan, same country. The issue is that we have common stake on what is security. And that needs to be negotiated.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rasul. And now we'll have Dr. Samial Aryan come.
Are you on the second thing?
I just want to say, obviously, these kind of panels and themes and topics that we've chosen do rise passions. But of course, we are in an academic setting. And the thing is that we need to be objective and try to step back a little bit. And we can have disagreements. There's nothing wrong with that. We still have to be objective and respectful of each other. And that's what we're going to maintain. Thank you very much for all our panelists. This was a very lively discussion, and we certainly enjoyed the presentations, and thank you for that. And we'd like, before we leave, just share with you. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for this session. Just real quick, we'll like to ask Dr. Sami to give certificates and awards to the speakers. Please, Dr. Aqil, join Dr. Sami. Dr. Ejaz. Dr. Rasul. And finally, our chair, Junaid. Thank you very much, everybody. We've taken some of the break time. Let's take 15 minutes, and we'll reconvene at 11:45. Thank you very much. Sorry. You've taken, it was nice, but you've taken lots of time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,